On a freezing night, a billionaire opens his gate to find two 5-year-old girls standing silently in the rain. They don't beg. They don't cry. They only ask one question that changes his life forever. Will you come back tomorrow? The rain fell without mercy that night, a cold winter drizzle washing over the quiet lakefront road like it was trying to erase every footprint that came before it. Julian Cross sat in the back seat of his car, eyes unfocused. Ty loosened the glow of distant streetlights sliding across the window like passing thoughts he no longer bothered to catch. At 47, Julian had everything numbers could measure: companies, assets, influence. And yet every night ended the same way. Silence. A house too large for one man. A life that echoed. As the car slowed near the iron gates of his estate, something broke the rhythm of the drive. Two small shapes stood just beyond the fence. Julian leaned forward. "Stop the car," he said quietly. The driver hesitated. "Sir, it's raining heavily, please." The car rolled to a halt. Under the faint light, Julian saw them clearly now. Two little girls, no umbrellas, coats too big for their small frames, sleeves hanging past their hands. They stood side by side, fingers intertwined, shoes damp but neatly worn. They weren't crying. They weren't running. They were waiting. Julian stepped out into the rain, the cold seeping instantly through his coat. As he approached, the older girl took half a step forward, not away, not closer. Just enough to speak. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly, her voice steady despite the chill. "We were wondering if there was somewhere safe we could stay tonight." Julian felt something tighten in his chest. Not fear, not urgency, recognition. The younger girl pressed closer to her sister, peeking out from behind her arm, wide-eyed but calm. For a moment, the rain was the only sound between them. Then Julian realized something that unsettled him more than the storm. These children had practiced this question. Julian crouched down slowly, careful not to startle them. Up close, he could see the details: clean faces, hair brushed as best as small hands could manage. These were not children who had been forgotten. They were children who had been waiting. "My name is Julian," he said gently. "What are your names?" The older girl hesitated, then answered. "I'm Alara. This is my sister Mira." Mira lifted her hand in a shy wave, her fingers barely visible beneath the sleeve of her coat. "How old are you?" Julian asked. 5, Alara replied. "We just turned 5? Julian nodded, absorbing the weight of that number. "And where are your parents?" Alara lowered her eyes, not in fear, but in thought. "Our grandma usually takes care of us. She said she'd be back tonight, but she didn't come yet." Mira whispered. "She promised." The word promise hung in the air, fragile and unfinished. Julian glanced toward the house behind him, lights glowing warmly through tall glass windows. He had hosted heads of state-closed deals worth billions, and yet this moment felt heavier than all of it combined. "It's very cold," he said. "Would you like to come inside for a bit, just to warm up?" Alara looked at Mira first. They exchanged a silent conversation only sisters could understand. "We don't go with strangers," Alara said carefully. Julian smiled, not offended. "That's very smart." He gestured toward the house. "There are other adults inside. You can meet them. We'll have something warm to drink. And if you want to leave after that, I'll make sure you get wherever you need to go." Mira tugged Alara's hand. "I'm cold." Alara took a breath. "Okay, but just for a little while." Julian opened the gate. As they stepped onto the path leading toward the house, he noticed something that stayed with him. Neither girl asked how long they could stay, as if they had learned not to expect more than a moment. Warm air rushed over the girls the moment they stepped inside, carrying the quiet hum of a house that was always perfect and always empty. The marble floors gleamed. The ceilings stretched impossibly high. Mira stopped walking. "Is this a museum?" she whispered. Alara shook her head, slowly, eyes wide but composed. I think it's a house. Julian watched their reflections in the glass walls, two tiny figures swallowed by space. For the first time, the size of his home felt wrong. A housekeeper appeared, concerned, softening her face instantly. "Oh my goodness," she said. "They're freezing." Moments later, the girls were seated at the kitchen table, wrapped in towels, small hands wrapped around mugs of warm milk. Steam curled into the air like something alive. Mira took a careful sip. "It's warm," she said, as if surprised. Ilara nodded politely. "Thank you, sir." Julian sat across from them, unsure what to do with his hands. He noticed how they drank slowly, deliberately, as if afraid the warmth might disappear if they moved too fast. "You can stay tonight," he said finally. "There's a guest room, 2 beds." Mira looked up instantly. "Together, yes," Julian said without hesitation. "Together." Ilara studied his face, searching for something, danger maybe, or expectation. Instead, she found only patience. "Just tonight," Julian added. "Tomorrow we'll talk to the right people, we'll do everything properly." Ilara nodded. "Okay." Later, as Julian stood outside the guest room door, he heard Mira whisper, barely audible, "Ilara, yes, do you think he'll forget us tomorrow?" There was a pause. Then Ilara answered softly with a certainty that did not belong to a 5-year-old. "Number 1, I don't think he's the kind who forgets." Julian remained where he was long after the lights went out. For the first time in years, the house felt like it was breathing again. The guest room had been untouched for years. Julian noticed that immediately. The sheets were crisp. The lamps worked perfectly. Nothing was broken, but nothing felt lived in. It was a room designed to be ready, not remembered. Ilara stepped inside, first cautious, as if the floor itself might shift beneath her. Mira followed, still clutching her sister's hand. 2 small beds sat side by side. Mira let go at once and climbed onto one, pressing her palms into the mattress. Her eyes widened. "It's soft," she said, surprised, almost suspicious. Ilara didn't sit. She walked the perimeter instead, counting steps without meaning to, checking corners, noticing exits. Julian recognized the instinct immediately. It was the instinct of someone who didn't assume safety, someone who confirmed it. "You can sleep here tonight," Julian said, standing at the doorway. "If you need anything, someone will be nearby." Ilara nodded. "Thank you for telling us." "For telling you what?" "That you'll be nearby." The housekeeper returned with pajamas too big but clean and warm. Mira giggled as the sleeves swallowed her hands. Julian turned to leave, then paused. "I'll be back in the morning," he said. "I promise." Mira looked up sharply. "You shouldn't promise things," she said quietly. Julian felt the words land heavier than intended. "You're right," he said after a moment. "Then let me say this instead. I plan to be here." Mira considered this, then nodded, satisfied. As Julian closed the door, he heard Ilara's voice, steady and low. "We're okay now." He stood in the hallway longer than necessary, listening to the faint rustle of blankets, realizing something unsettling. For the first time in years, he wanted morning to come quickly. Julian woke before sunrise. It wasn't the sound of the house, there was none. It was the awareness that 2 children were asleep under his roof and that the next step mattered. At breakfast, Ilara sat straight-backed, hands folded. Mira swung her legs beneath the chair, humming softly. They ate slowly, carefully. Not because they were told to, but because they were used to meals being uncertain. Julian poured juice. "Did you sleep well?" Mira nodded. "I dreamed about a yellow dog," Ilara corrected gently. "We don't have a dog." "I know," Mira replied, "but he was friendly." Julian smiled despite himself. He chose his words with care. "Can you tell me a little more about your grandma?" Ilara didn't answer right away. She waited until Mira was focused on her toast. "She's kind," Ilara said. "She tells stories. She says we should always say thank you, even when things don't go right." "And where is she now?" Julian asked. Ilara swallowed. She went to stay somewhere else. Grown-ups said she needed rest. Mira frowned. They said she'd come back. Julian felt the familiar urge to fix, to smooth, to control. He resisted it. Sometimes, he said carefully, when plans change, adults should explain better. I'm sorry that didn't happen. Ilara looked up at him, surprised not by the apology, but by the way it was offered. What happens now? She asked. Julian met her gaze. Now we do things the right way. We talk to people whose job is to help families. We make sure you're safe. Mira's voice was small. Will we have to leave? Julian didn't rush the answer. Eventually there will be decisions. But no one is taking you anywhere without care. And you won't be alone while we figure it out. Ilara nodded slowly. Not relieved, but reassured enough to keep breathing. By mid-morning, the house felt different. Phones rang not with business calls, but with names Julian rarely spoke aloud. Child advocates, family lawyers, professionals whose job was not profit, but protection. Julian explained everything. Clearly, honestly. He did not exaggerate. He did not hide the truth. 2 5-year-old girls. A missed pickup. 1 night of shelter. Nothing more. Nothing less. When the social worker arrived, she knelt immediately to the girl's level. My name is Miss Harper, she said gently. I talk to families and help make plans. Ilara nodded politely. Mira waved again. They spoke together at the table. No raised voices. No fear. Miss Harper observed the warmth, the calm, the way Julian waited, before answering, the way the girls checked his face before responding. These children appear safe, she said later privately. But there are procedures. Julian nodded. I understand. The decision was made carefully. The girls would stay temporarily in a licensed care setting while their situation was reviewed. The house felt larger after Ilara and Mira left. Not emptier, larger, as if the walls had pulled back, exposing spaces Julian had never noticed before. He stood in the kitchen long after the door closed, 2 untouched cups of milk cooling on the table. He told himself this was temporary, that he had done what any responsible adult should do, that following the rules mattered. And yet the silence pressed in with an unfamiliar weight. Julian returned to his office, but the screens stayed dark. Instead, he found himself sitting on the edge of the desk, staring at nothing. He replayed small details, the way Ilara listened more than she spoke. The way Mira counted steps without realizing it. The way both girls said thank you as if it were a rule that kept the world from falling apart. That afternoon, Ms. Harper called. They're settling in, she said. They asked about you. Julian's chest tightened. What did you say that you cared enough to make sure they were safe? He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Over the next few days, Julian reorganized his life without announcing it. Meetings were delegated. Travel was postponed. He began learning a new language, court filings, child welfare timelines, careful phrases like temporary placement and best interest review. On his first visit, Ilara sat upright in a plastic chair, hands folded. Mira ran to him, then stopped halfway, remembering herself, and walked instead. You came, Mira said, relief flickering across her face. I said I would, Julian replied. Ilara studied him closely. Some people say that. I know, Julian answered. That's why I came. They drew pictures together. Mira drew a house with 3 figures inside. Ilara added windows. When time was up, Mira asked quietly, when will we see you again? Julian checked the schedule. In 2 days. Ilara nodded. We'll remember. As he walked out, Julian realized something that unsettled him deeply. He was no longer waiting for answers. He was preparing to stay. Time slowed into something thick and frustrating. Julian learned quickly that caring was not the same as controlling. Forms took days. Reviews took weeks. Every step required patience, something he had mastered in business, but never in matters of the heart. Each visit followed a pattern. Mira talked first, eagerly listing small details. New crayons, a puzzle she almost finished, a storybook with a bear that looked sad but got better. Ilara watched. She always watched. On the fourth visit, she finally spoke while Julian packed up the coloring pencils. "They keep saying soon," she said. Julian looked at her. "What do you think soon means?" Ilara shrugged. "It means not now." Julian felt the truth of it settle uncomfortably. At night, alone in the house, he researched childhood development, not out of obligation, but out of fear of doing harm through ignorance. He learned about routines, about consistency, about how children learned safety not from words, but from repetition. He stopped sending gifts. He sent letters instead. Short ones, predictable ones. "I will see you on Tuesday. I am thinking of you today." "You did nothing wrong," Miss Harper noticed. "They ask for your letters," she said. "Especially Ilara. She keeps them very neat." Julian smiled at that. But pressure began to build elsewhere. His advisors questioned his availability. A board member suggested he resolve the distraction. Julian listened politely. Then he declined politely. One evening during a visit, Mira tugged his sleeve. "Are we in trouble?" she asked. "No," Julian said firmly. Ilara looked up. "Then why do grown-ups look worried?" Julian took a breath. "Because grown-ups sometimes confuse rules with care. We're working to make sure you get both." Mira leaned against him just slightly. It wasn't dramatic, but it was trust. And Julian understood then that waiting was no longer neutral. Waiting was something he was doing with them. The question came on a quiet afternoon. No officials, no meetings, just 3 chairs and a half-finished puzzle. Ilara placed the last piece carefully, then looked up at Julian. "Why are you helping us?" Mira froze mid-reach, clearly listening. Julian didn't answer right away. He had learned that rushing only broke fragile things. "I could say it's because it's the right thing," he began slowly. "And that would be true, but it's not the whole truth." Ilara waited. "When I was young," Julian continued, "there were times when no one showed up when they said they would. I learned to expect less." Mira frowned. "That's not fair." "No," Julian agreed. "It isn't." Ilara considered this. "So you don't want us to expect less?" "No," Julian said softly. "I want you to expect honesty, even when it's slow." Mira looked between them. "Can we stay with you?" The room went still. Julian met their eyes, both of them. "I'm trying to make that possible, but I won't pretend it's already decided." Ilara nodded, absorbing the uncertainty without fear. Mira asked the final question, the one that mattered most. "If it doesn't work, will you disappear?" Julian felt the weight of it settle into his bones. "No," he said. "That part doesn't change." Mira leaned back, satisfied. Ilara reached out and took Julian's hand briefly, deliberately. "Okay," she said. "Then we can wait." As Julian left that day, he understood something with startling clarity. This story was no longer about shelter. It was about permanence, and whether he was brave enough to choose it. The meeting room was calm in the way serious rooms always were. Neutral colors, soft lighting, chairs placed at careful distances. Julian sat across from 2 professionals whose job was to decide futures without becoming attached to them. Files lay open on the table, thin but heavy with consequence. "These situations are delicate," one of them said gently. "You understand that?" Julian nodded. "I do." He had prepared for this. Read every guideline, learned the language of care and caution. He spoke clearly, never emotionally, about consistency, about stability, about why he believed Ilara and Mira needed fewer transitions, not more. "You are a single adult," the other professional noted, "with significant business obligations." "Yes," Julian replied, "and I've adjusted them." They looked up. He explained how meetings were delegated, how travel had been reduced, how his home schedule had changed. He did not frame it as sacrifice, only as choice. "What makes you certain this isn't temporary?" the woman asked. Julian paused. "Because temporary things don't change how you plan the rest of your life," he said. "This has." Silence followed, not uncomfortable, but thoughtful. Later that day, Julian visited Ilara and Mira. They were working on a puzzle again, this time of the ocean. "Did you talk to the rule people?" Mira asked. "I did," Julian said. Ilara tilted her head. And they asked many questions." Mira smiled faintly. "They always do." Julian crouched to their level. "There may be a court hearing. That means a judge listens carefully and decides what's best." Mira blinked. "Will we have to talk?" "Only if you want to," Julian said. "And only simple things." Ilara considered this. "We can do that." That night alone, Julian stood in the guest room back at his house. 2 small beds still made untouched. He realized then that he was no longer preparing for a possibility. He was preparing for a responsibility that would not fade quietly. And he welcomed it. The courthouse waiting room had no clock. Julian noticed immediately. It was intentional. Time moved differently here. Not by minutes, but by outcomes. Ilara sat straight-backed beside him, hands folded in her lap. Mira leaned against his side, her small fingers curled into his sleeve. They wore simple dresses, comfortable and neat. No one had told them to behave. They simply did. A social worker knelt in front of them. "The judge may ask a few questions," she explained gently. "There are no wrong answers." Mira nodded seriously. "Okay," Ilara asked. "Can we say, 'I don't know'?" "Yes," the woman smiled. "That's always allowed." When they were called inside, the courtroom felt larger than it was. The judge's voice was calm, unhurried. She spoke first to Julian. "Mr. Cross, you are requesting guardianship of 2 5-year-old children." Why Julian stood. His prepared words faded. "Because they need consistency," he said simply. "And because I am willing to provide it." The judge nodded and turned her attention to the girls. "Ilara," she said kindly, "do you know why you're here?" Ilara nodded. "To talk about where we live. And where would you like to live?" Ilara glanced at Mira, then back to the judge. "With someone who comes back." The room stilled. Mira added softly, "And who tells us the truth?" The judge smiled, not warmly, but thoughtfully. Afterward in the hallway, Mira whispered, "Did we do it right?" Julian knelt. "You did exactly right." Days passed, then weeks. Julian waited not passively, but steadily. He visited, he wrote, he showed up. When the call finally came, he answered immediately. The decision was clear. Temporary guardianship granted. Supervised, structured, real. Julian closed his eyes, not in relief, in resolve. The return was quiet. No banners, no announcements, just a car pulling into the driveway and 2 small girls stepping inside a house that now felt different. Mira kicked off her shoes and laughed. "It smells the same." Ilara placed her bag neatly by the door. "That's good." Julian showed them the room again. This time he said, "You can put your things wherever you like." Ilara chose the bed closest to the window. Mira took the other without discussion. They ate dinner together, simple, warm, unremarkable, and that was what made it extraordinary. Later, as Julian tucked them in, Mira asked, "Are we guests?" Julian answered carefully, "You're here because the judge believes this is a good place for you to be." Ilara nodded. For now, Julian agreed, "And we'll take care of every now properly." Mira reached out and held his hand. "You didn't disappear." "No," Julian said softly. "I won't." As the lights dimmed, Julian stood in the doorway watching 2 children fall asleep without fear. For the first time, the house was not holding its breath. It was home learning how to be one. The hardest part was not the paperwork. It was the quiet hours in between. Julian discovered this during the first full week after Ilara and Mira returned under temporary guardianship. There were schedules now, clear rules, check-ins, professionals observing from a respectful distance. Everything was orderly, appropriate, and legal, and yet, the real work happened in the small moments no one documented. Like the first morning, Ilara woke before everyone else and stood silently in the hallway, unsure whether she was allowed to move without permission. Julian found her there, fully dressed, shoes on. "You don't have to wait," he said gently. Ilara looked up. "I didn't know the rule." Julian knelt beside her. "If you don't know a rule here, you can ask. Or you can decide. We'll figure it out together." That afternoon, Mira spilled juice at the table. She froze, eyes wide, breath held. Julian reached for a towel. "It's okay." Mira didn't move. "I can clean it. You don't need to be fast," he said. "Just careful." The moment passed quietly, but something shifted. Mira sat back down. At night, routines formed slowly. Teeth brushed together. Stories read aloud, sometimes twice, because Mira liked hearing the same ending again. Ilara preferred listening without interruption, absorbing every word. One evening after the lights were out, Julian heard a soft knock. Ilara stood there holding a book. "Can you read one more page?" He smiled. "Of course." When he finished, she didn't leave right away. "Do judges ever change their minds?" she asked. Julian considered the question carefully. "Sometimes. But that's why we keep doing things right." Ilara nodded, satisfied with the honesty. Later, Julian sat alone in his office, reviewing notes from the child specialist. Attachment forms through consistency, not perfection. He read it twice. For the first time in decades, Julian stopped thinking in outcomes. He thought in days. And for the first time, staying felt more important than winning. Healing did not arrive dramatically. It arrived sideways. Ilara began leaving her shoes by the door instead of beside her bed. Mira stopped asking where Julian would be, later accepting his presence without constant confirmation. But some habits lingered. Mira still ate quickly, glancing up between bites. Ilara still listened for footsteps before falling asleep. The child psychologist explained it gently. "They're not afraid," she said. "They're remembering." Julian adjusted without making announcements. Meals became predictable. Voices stayed calm. Promises were made sparingly and always kept. One afternoon, Julian found Mira sitting on the floor with a stack of drawings. "These are houses," she said. "This one is when we lived with Grandma. This one is here." "And this one?" Julian asked. Mira hesitated. "That's just in case." Julian nodded. "It's okay to have just in case." Ilara watched closely. That night, during a scheduled check-in, a caseworker asked Ilara a simple question. "Do you feel safe here?" Ilara thought for a long moment. "Yes." "Why?" "Because no one yells," she said. "And because when plans change, Julian tells us." The caseworker wrote it down. Afterward, Julian sat with Ilara on the couch. "You did well," he said. Ilara shook her head. "I just told the truth." Julian smiled. "That's what doing well means here." Later, Mira asked the question she had been holding for weeks. "Are we staying long?" Julian didn't avoid it. "We're working toward making it permanent." Mira's eyes widened. "Forever," Julian nodded slowly. "If everyone agrees, it's best." Mira leaned against him, content. Ilara stayed quiet. That night, Julian found Ilara awake, staring at the ceiling. "Do you want to ask something?" he said softly. Ilara turned her head. "If it's forever, can it stop being forever?" Julian felt the weight of it. "Forever," he said carefully, "means we keep choosing each other, even when it's hard." Ilara considered this. Okay. It wasn't excitement, it was acceptance. And that meant more. The hearing was smaller than the first. Fewer people, fewer questions. But the stakes were heavier. The judge reviewed reports, school assessments, psychological evaluations, observations of daily life. Ilara and Mira sat quietly coloring between questions. Julian spoke when asked. He didn't argue. He didn't perform. "I am not perfect," he said plainly, "but I am consistent, and I am here." The judge nodded. She turned to the girls. "Do you know what adoption means?" Mira answered first. "It means we don't have to pack again." The judge smiled softly. Ilara added, "It means someone stays even when it's boring." There was a pause. Then the judge spoke the word that would change everything. Approved. Julian didn't react right away. He waited until he felt both small hands slip into his. Outside, Mira asked, "So, are we really family?" Julian knelt. "If you want to be." Mira grinned. "I do." Ilara thought, then nodded once. "Me too." That evening, the house felt lighter. They celebrated with pancakes for dinner, burned on one side, perfect on the other. Mira laughed. Ilara poured syrup carefully. As Julian tucked them in, Mira asked sleepily, "What do we call you now?" Julian smiled gently. "You can call me Julian, or something else. Whenever you're ready." Mira yawned. "Okay." Ilara whispered, barely audible, "Good night, Dad." Julian closed the door quietly, heart steady, breath even. For the first time, the future did not feel like something to manage. It felt like something to grow. When Julian explained it to them, he knelt again. "You're going somewhere safe," he said, "with people whose job is to help, and I'll stay involved." Mira asked the question that mattered most. "Will you come see us?" "Yes," Julian said without hesitation. "That's something I can promise." Ilara studied his face one last time. "You didn't turn us away." Julian shook his head. "I couldn't." As the girls prepared to leave, Mira reached out and slipped her small hand into his. "Thank you for the warm milk," she said. Julian watched them go with the unsettling realization that something irreversible had begun. Not a rescue, a responsibility. Normal looked simple from the outside. It wasn't. It was a lunchbox on a granite counter. A tiny jacket zipped up wrong the first time. A backpack that seemed too big for a 5-year-old body. It was Ilara standing still at the front door, watching Julian's hand on the knob like the door itself was a promise. "You're coming back," she said. Not a question, not quite. Julian crouched to her height. "Yes, I'll be back before the afternoon sun goes down." Mira bounced on the rug, holding her shoes. "Is school gonna have treasure?" Julian smiled softly. "Sometimes it has stickers. That's close." The kindergarten was warm and orderly, painted walls and gentle voices. The teacher, Miss Callahan, greeted them with a calm that felt like a blanket. "We're glad you're here," she told the girls, not with pity, but with welcome. Ilara stayed near Julian's side. Mira waved too enthusiastically, then hid her face behind Ilara's arm. 5-year-old bravery always arrived in waves. Julian had expected tears. Instead, he got something more complicated: Ilara's silence. She looked at the room. The circle rug, the cubbies, the other children laughing in small bursts like bubbles. Her face stayed composed, too composed. Miss Callahan leaned down. "Would you like to pick a cubby?" Ilara nodded once and chose the one closest to the wall, as if she wanted something solid behind her. Mira picked the brightest one and immediately asked if she could put her snack inside to keep it safe. Julian didn't correct her. He just breathed. The first goodbye was brief. Julian knelt, kissed both foreheads, and stood. Mira waved. "Bye, Julian." Ilara lifted her hand slowly. "Bye." And then Julian left. In the car, he sat for a moment longer than necessary. Not because he didn't trust the school, because he didn't trust the feeling in his chest, an old panic, a new tenderness, both tugging at the same place. By noon, Julian was in a boardroom on video posture, perfect voice controlled. People spoke in numbers and timelines. He answered, delegated, redirected. The new leadership model was still an adjustment, but it was holding. And then his phone buzzed. Ms. Callahan. Julian stepped out of the meeting without explanation. In the hallway, his voice stayed calm. Is everything okay? Yes, Ms. Callahan said quickly. Truly, no emergency. I just wanted to share something. Julian's breath slowed. Okay. During story time, she continued. Mira raised her hand and asked if you'd come back at the end of the day. Julian closed his eyes briefly. And what did you say? I said yes. That you always come back. A pause. And Alara the teacher added, lowering her voice gently, she didn't ask. But she watched the door every time it opened. Julian swallowed. Thank you for telling me. When he arrived for pickup, he stood where the girls could see him before they reached the door. He didn't want them searching. Mira spotted him first and sprinted, then slowed down the last few steps as if she remembered she was supposed to walk. She arrived breathless. You came back, she said, smiling like it was a joke she needed to hear again. Julian nodded. I said I would. Alara walked more slowly, holding her drawing with both hands, like offering it required control. When she reached Julian, she looked up at him, eyes steady. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say I missed you. She simply said, okay. And something in Julian's chest unclenched. That night after dinner, Mira brought her drawing to the table. It was a stick figure house, 3 figures inside 2 hearts floating above. Alara placed hers down more carefully. It was the same house, only she had drawn the door slightly open. Julian traced it with his eyes. Why is the door open? Alara answered softly without drama. So you can come back in. Julian reached across the table, resting his hand near hers, not grabbing, not forcing contact, just offering it. Alara slid her fingers into his. The house for the first time felt like it had a heartbeat. The quarterly check-in arrived on a bright morning with ordinary sunshine. That was the strange part. Big moments often came wearing small clothes. Ms. Harper returned with a clipboard and a gentle smile, and Julian's home suddenly felt like it was being measured. Not the rooms, not the security system, not the spotless kitchen, the air. Alara noticed first. She went quiet, sitting straighter like a small soldier preparing for inspection. Mira became extra helpful, trying to fold napkins into perfect squares and asking 3 times if anyone wanted more water. Julian watched and felt something sharp inside him. Not anger, not fear. A protective awareness. He knelt beside the girls before the meeting began. This is not a punishment, he said softly. This is part of how we keep things safe and official. Mira nodded hard. Alara studied his face, then nodded once. Ms. Harper spoke gently, directing her words to the children first. Hi, Alara. Hi, Mira. I'm just here to see how everyone is doing and to make sure your home feels good. Mira smiled. We have pancakes sometimes, Alara added. And school. And you feel okay here? Ms. Harper asked. Alara's eyes flicked to Julian. Julian didn't speak. He held still, letting her answer without pressure. Alara said calmly, yes. Mira added, he comes back. Ms. Harper's smile softened. That's a very important detail. After that, she spoke with Julian in his office. Professional questions, clear answers. The kind of conversation where each word mattered. How is the leadership transition going, she asked. Julian didn't bristle. It's stable. I remain engaged, but I've protected my evenings and mornings. And support, I have a housekeeper who's become family, Julian said, and a tutor who helps. The school is excellent, and I'm committed to therapy check-ins that are child-friendly and focused on routine building. Ms. Harper nodded, impressed without saying it. Then she asked the question that always came. Any concerns? Julian hesitated. Sometimes, he admitted, I can't tell if they're comfortable or simply being good. Ms. Harper leaned forward slightly. That's an astute observation. Children who've had to adapt quickly often learn to perform calmness. The goal is to create a home where they can be messy emotionally, not physically, and still feel safe. Julian exhaled. How do I invite that without pushing? By staying steady, she said, and by allowing them to disagree with you sometimes and still be loved. When Ms. Harper left, Mira watched her car disappear from the driveway and whispered, "Did we pass?" Julian crouched again, meeting her eyes. "This isn't a class, but yes, you did well. Because you were honest." Ilara, quiet as ever, asked the sharper question. What if one day they say no? Julian felt the world narrow for a moment. He answered carefully. Then we ask why and we fix what we can. We don't panic. We don't blame. We just keep choosing what's right. Ilara held his gaze. Okay. That evening, Mira dropped her spoon. It clattered loudly. She froze, eyes wide, then looked around like the room might change shape. Julian didn't rush. He picked up the spoon calmly and set it back beside her bowl. "New spoon," he said. "No big deal." Mira's shoulders softened. Ilara watched, absorbing, learning. Later, when Julian tucked them in, Mira asked, "Do you ever get tired of us?" Julian paused, then answered with the honesty Ms. Harper had asked him to practice. "I get tired sometimes," he said gently. "But not of you. Never of you." Mira smiled, satisfied. Ilara rolled over toward the wall, but her voice came from the darkness like a small truth. "That's a good answer." Julian stood in the doorway for a moment longer, realizing the check-in hadn't been a test. It had been a mirror. And for once, he didn't hate what he saw. The first time Ilara cried, it wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was almost invisible. It happened on an ordinary Thursday after school when Mira ran into the kitchen to announce she had learned how to write the letter M like my name. Julian praised her, hugged her, put her drawing on the fridge. Mira glowed like a lamp. Ilara walked in behind her and placed her backpack down with careful precision. She didn't speak. She didn't reach for a snack. She went straight to the hallway where their shoes sat lined up. Julian noticed. "Hey," he said softly, not crowding her. "Do you want an apple or crackers?" Ilara shook her head once. Mira, still buzzing, asked, "Can we have pancakes again?" "Like celebration pancakes," Julian laughed gently. "We'll see." Mira skipped off toward the living room, humming. Ilara remained by the shoes. Julian walked closer, slowly, giving her room to step away if she wanted. Something happened today. Ilara's face stayed calm, but her eyes didn't. They were too bright, like they were holding water behind glass. Julian waited. At last, Ilara spoke. "At school, a kid asked if we're your real kids." Julian's chest tightened, not with anger, but with understanding of the quiet bruise such a question could create. "What did you say he asked?" Ilara's voice dropped. "I said yes." Julian nodded. That was true. Ilara blinked once hard. Then the kid said, "But you don't look the same." Julian inhaled slowly. He could feel his own instinct to fix, to lecture, to build a perfect answer. But Ilara didn't need a speech. She needed to be held by the truth. "You're right," Julian said gently. "We don't look the same. Families can match in faces, or they can match in choices." Ilara swallowed. Her fingers curled into the fabric of her sleeve. Julian lowered himself until they were eye level. "Do you want to know what makes you mine?" Ilara didn't nod. She didn't shake her head. She just listened. Julian continued, voice quiet. "It's the way you check the door and still come back to the table. It's the way you hold Mira's hand even when you're tired. It's the way you tell the truth even when it's hard. That's family." Ilara's mouth trembled once, almost imperceptible. And then for the first time she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against Julian's shoulder. The tears came silently warm against his shirt, small and unstoppable. Julian didn't speak. He didn't say, "Don't cry." He didn't rush to end it. He simply wrapped his arms around her and stayed steady, letting her body learn what words couldn't teach, that sadness was allowed here. Mira returned a minute later, confused. Ilara didn't pull away. She stayed where she was breathing. Julian looked at Mira and made a gentle gesture, come closer quietly. Mira stepped in and hugged Ilara from the side, small arms wrapping around her sister like a blanket. "I don't like mean questions," Mira whispered. Ilara's voice came out rough and tiny. "Me neither." Julian rested his hand on both their backs. "Then we'll practice answers, not to fight, just to tell the truth." That evening they made pancakes anyway, not for celebration, for comfort. Mira drew a picture afterward, 3 stick figures under one big umbrella. She wrote with help 3 words beneath it: "We stay together." Ilara taped it above her bed. At bedtime, she didn't ask if Julian was coming back tomorrow. She didn't need to. But as Julian turned off the light, Ilara spoke into the dark voice, small but clear. "Next time, I want to say it louder." Julian paused, heart steady. "And I'll be right there when you do." The final hearing did not feel final. That surprised Julian. He had imagined tension, tight shoulders, a room heavy with expectation. Instead, it felt quiet, almost ordinary, like the moment before a deep breath. Ilara and Mira sat beside him, feet not quite touching the floor. Mira swung hers gently. Ilara kept hers still, hands folded, posture careful but no longer rigid. The judge reviewed documents, nodding as she turned pages. Reports from the school. Notes from the caseworker. Evaluations that spoke in measured language about attachment progress and stability. Then she looked up. "Mr. Cross," she said, "you've adjusted your life significantly for these children." Julian met her gaze. "Yes, and you understand that adoption is not an ending," she continued. "It's a beginning that requires patience, humility, and permanence." Julian nodded once. "I do." The judge turned to the girls. "Ilara," she said kindly, "do you understand why you're here today?" Ilara took a breath. "Because you're deciding if we get to stay." "And where would you like to stay?" the judge asked. Ilara didn't look at Julian this time. She looked straight ahead. With him, she said clearly, "Because he stays when it's quiet, not just when people are watching." The room softened around those words. The judge smiled faintly and turned to Mira. "And you," Mira beamed. "I like it there. We have pancakes. And when I wake up, someone is still there." The judge closed the folder. "I've heard enough," she said. The decision was brief, clear, permanent. Adoption approved. Julian felt Ilara's hand slide into his, steady and warm. Mira leaned into his side, satisfied before the words even finished landing. Outside the building, sunlight felt brighter than it had any right to. Mira looked up. "So, we don't have to pack anymore." Julian crouched, meeting both their eyes. "No, you don't." Ilara nodded slowly, as if placing a final piece where it belonged. "Okay," she said. "Then we can start." Julian smiled. They already had. They didn't throw a big party. Julian considered it balloons, banners, something loud and visible. But when he asked Ilara what she wanted, she thought for a long moment. "Can we just have dinner?" she said. "Together." So they did. Julian cooked slowly, imperfectly. Mira insisted on stirring something that didn't need stirring. Ilara set the table, aligning the plates with quiet precision. They ate pasta and bread, laughing when Mira got sauce on her nose. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't symbolic. It was normal. After dinner, Julian brought out a small cake. No writing, just candles, 3 of them. "For us," he said. Mira clapped. Ilara watched the flames dance. "Make a wish," Mira said. Julian leaned back. "You can go first." Mira closed her eyes dramatically. "I wish we always eat together." Ilara leaned in next. She didn't close her eyes. I wish she said softly that we keep telling the truth. Julian felt something warm settle in his chest. They blew out the candles together. Later, as the house grew quiet, Julian tucked them in. Mira fell asleep, quickly worn out from happiness. Ilara stayed awake. "Julian," she asked. "Yes, you can still go to work, right?" Julian smiled gently. "Yes, and I'll still come back." Ilara nodded. "Good." She hesitated, then added almost casually, "You don't have to be perfect." Julian exhaled. That's a relief. She smiled a small, real smile and rolled onto her side. As Julian turned off the light, he paused at the door. For years he had measured success in permanence, buildings, contracts, legacies. But tonight, permanence looked like something else entirely. 3 plates in the sink. 2 beds that would be used again tomorrow. 1 quiet promise that didn't need repeating. 1 year later, the house no longer echoed. It hummed. Shoes were scattered by the door. Crayons lived in drawers they weren't meant for. A calendar on the fridge tracked school events and dentist appointments, and 1 important date circled in blue: Family Day. Ilara was 6 now, still thoughtful, still observant, but lighter. She asked questions without rehearsing them first. She disagreed sometimes, and she laughed quietly but often. Mira was exactly as she'd always been, curious, affectionate, full of declarations. She announced love easily, like it was a language she had always known. Julian watched them from the kitchen as they worked on a puzzle together. Mira chattering, Ilara organizing pieces into thoughtful rows. Dad, Mira called suddenly the word, now natural, easy. "Can you help?" Julian crossed the room. "Which piece?" Mira pointed. Ilara handed it to him without comment. It fit. Later that afternoon, they walked to the park. Ilara held Julian's hand without thinking. Mira ran ahead, then turned back to make sure they were still there. They always were. As the sun dipped low, Ilara leaned against Julian on the bench. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I used to think family was something you had to match." Julian smiled. "What do you think now?" "I think family is who notices when you're quiet," she said. Julian looked down at her. "I think you're right." That night, as Julian made his rounds, lights off, doors locked, he paused outside their room. Mira slept sprawled across her bed. Ilara slept curled on her side, the drawing from long ago still taped above her head. "We stay together." Julian closed the door gently. The storm that had brought them together felt distant now. Not erased, but transformed. Some things did come after storms. Not silence, but home. Did this story leave a lasting impression on you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment, rate it from 1 to 10, and tap the end screen to see another heartwarming story waiting for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Then tap the bell icon so you don't miss any new stories. Until our next story.